a week or so ago at this point, we got to talk about a new map called Myrick Valley and the returning map of Operation Firestorm in Battlefield 6. Myself and a handful of other creators got to play and post our experiences there, and included with that session was a much more up-to-date build of Battlefield 6 compared to what we saw with the beta. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is 100% the launch build partitioned for those two maps that we got to play, or if we're missing some small piece that may make it into the game after it's certified gold, but we got a much better look at things coming in the game. We've already talked about classes and a much more thorough breakdown of what we saw there, the additional training paths, all gadgets, and changes made since the beta build, but today I want to take a little bit of a look at the weaponry ahead of launch here. Again, it's possible we may see one or two weapons sneak their way into the game before launch, since we saw leaked weapon listings months back that included more weapons, but it also could equally be just as likely that they're related to in-season weapons coming after the launch. Kind of a toss-up, but today we're taking a look at the 45 weapons in Battlefield 6 that we know of and a few changes made to those that you've seen since the beta. So drop your thoughts, drop a like, and make sure to subscribe for more Battlefield 6 and other FPS coverage. I'd love to have you in the community. We've got a very, very busy fall upcoming, so if you'd like to come along for the ride, we'd love to have you. But for now, let's get into it. So let's start with these rifles here. Within the beta, we ended up only having a handful, but now within this updated version, we'll end up having 8 assault rifles to play around with. The M433, or the H&K 433, the B36A4, otherwise the G36A1, the SOAR 556 Mark II, otherwise the FN Scar L, the AK-4D, the TR7 or the 47, the Cord 6P67, the NVO228E, otherwise the Galil Ace-32, and the L85A3. Now, from the beta, we had access to the M433, the B36A4, and the NVO228E. Now, in our recent play session, I was able to use a couple more of these, the SOAR 556 Mark II, the TR7, and the L85A3. I didn't get around to all of these just simply because there wasn't enough time in terms of how many matches we played versus how many new weapons there were, but the SOAR had the second slowest fire rate here, but it was very controllable, very accurate, and was something that seemed like it was more versatile at the medium to long range position. The AK-4D does have the slowest rate of fire. Again, didn't quite get some hands-on with that, but the trade-off being that it is tied for the highest damage in class, which is definitely cool. The TR7 is another weapon that has a higher damage profile, but also a high rate of fire. So this is likely going to be something that has a lot less control, recoil being a mitigating factor there. The Cord 6P67 has a high rate of fire of 900, a best-in-class rate of fire, or rather highest in class, and a lowest-in-class damage of 20 per shot. So that rate of fire really trying to compensate for that differential there. The NVO228E, of course, you saw that already. The L85A3 has a 25 damage per shot and a relatively mid-ground rate of fire. This, when using it, was something that did feel like that middle ground rifle. Your carbines, you have the M4A1, the M277, otherwise the MCX Spear, the AK-205, the M417A2, otherwise the H&K 417A2, the GR2BC, which is otherwise the FB Grot B10, or the MSBS Grot, the QBZ-192, and the SG-553R, otherwise the SIG 553. New with this build was the M277, the GRT-BC, the QBZ-192, and the SG-553R. Now, the carbines were already good within the beta, and honestly, the newer build here introduces a couple of more that might not necessarily be problematic, but like they're going to be fun to play around with for sure. The GRT-BC ended up having the highest rate of fire, but a moderate damage. The one that stood out to me was the SG-553R. That had a tied best-in-class damage, tied with the M417A2 from the beta of 33 per round, but had a much higher fire rate and a larger magazine. So this is one that I think could be a favorite of players going forward. The QBZ-119 was a more versatile weapon, while the M277 was fit for more mid-range, but its control was lacking unless you kitted it out with relevant attachments. Your SMGs, you had the SGX, otherwise the MPX, the PW5A3, otherwise the MP5, the PW7A2, otherwise the MP7, the UMG40, otherwise the UMP, the USG90, otherwise the P90, the KV9, otherwise the Chris Vector, the SCW10, otherwise the B&T ACP10, and the SL9. Now, again, a lot of these we saw during the beta. I ended up getting some hands-on with the UMG40, USG90, and KV9 out of what we had available here in a couple of the play sessions. The UMG40 was much slower fire rate, but very manageable in terms of control and actually pretty solid at mid-range. The KV-9 was as blistering a fire rate as you may remember or expect, but the strange part is there's not really any true like extended mags that makes you feel comfortable with this. It is something that still appears to take, based off the damage, granted, 4 shots to kill, but with that fire rate being so high and with there only being a max of 28 rounds available at a time, 27 being the max for your magazine with 1 in the chamber, it's interesting. Like, it's going to be fun to use and it's going to be something that feels like you're ripping through enemies, but I don't know how many like larger engagements you can take at a time. We'll have to wait and see. For your LMGs, you have the L110, the DRS IAR, otherwise the M27 IAR, the M60, the RPKM, the M123K, otherwise the MG4 KA3, the M250, otherwise the Sig Sauer LMG 6.8, the KTS 100 Mark 8, otherwise the Ultimax 100, and the M240L. Now these, truthfully, I didn't get around to playing with in our updated play sessions, but a few that would stand out in terms of statistics. The M123K is the fastest rate of fire with 830, while your M60, RPK, and M240L are all leading in that damage profile of 33 each. For your DMRs, you have the M39 EMR, otherwise an EBR, the LMR27, the SVK 8.6, which is the SVCH 8.6, and the SVDM. Now, your EMR and your SVK 8.6 were in the beta, so those, again, we're a little bit more familiar with. The LMR27, that's your more aggressive DMR here at this, the highest of the fire rates of the DMR classification, but the lowest of the damage as a result. And your SVDM is your highest damage, tied with your EMR, but has a rate of fire of only 300. As for your snipers, you have the M2010 ESR, otherwise the Remington M2010. You have the SV98 and the PSR, which is the Barrett MRAD. Now, in a lot of the different attributes, a lot of these are almost identical. Like, all of their damage is listed as 100. 2 of the 3 have a rate of fire of 38. The M2010 ESR is the only one that's slightly higher with a 43 rate of fire. The differences come down to a lot of the stock magazines and a few other smaller details here. The PSR was honestly a lot of fun to play around with. I played a little bit with the SV98, in which it still felt very good and it definitely felt nice to hit some shots with, but it seems like you're gonna have some relative balance between these 3 if you want to choose the sniping option in Battlefield 6. Your shotguns, we have 3 in this most updated build, and perhaps at launch, of the M87A1 that we saw in the beta, otherwise the Mossberg 590A1 Magpul, the M1014, otherwise the Benelli M4, and the 18.5 KSK, which is the Ishmash KSK. Now the M87A1 end up having some adjustments here where the shotgun no longer one-shot kills, potentially from a just further distance. Their specifications of what happened were a little bit unclear, which is interesting given the damage profile that was from our menu footage. And it also appeared that in the most recent build, it has a wider pellet spread as well. But the remaining 2 end up having higher rates of fire and progressively decreasing damage though. So I'm curious to see the balance of how this all works out when we actually end up seeing this in game. And finally, you have your pistols. You have the P18, otherwise the Sig Sauer P320 M18, the ES 5.5, otherwise the 5.7, the M45A1, otherwise the Colt M45A1, and the M44, otherwise the Taurus Raging Hunter. Now, I didn't play around with, honestly, any of these here. I was too busy checking out the maps, the new vehicles, and the other new primary weapons, but all of these, being great for mobility, relatively are in line with each other in terms of their damage properties and their rates of fire. Obviously, the M44, that Magnum, is going to be a little bit different and has a bit more damage as a harder hitting pistol, but those are your options here for your sidearms. All in all, going from 15 weapons that we have at the beta to now what we'll see potentially at launch of a total number of 45 weapons. It's not the most we've ever seen in a Battlefield game, but it is definitely a lot more for players to try out and get accustomed to. And honestly, I really did think that of the ones that I got to play, everything felt unique enough to their own right, where it felt like a different gun. You're not going to have seemingly too many of those situations where it kind of all blends together. Now, of course, there are probably going to be those weapons that become air quote meta, and these ones that players usually gravitate towards, but it is definitely something that each of these felt, in our experience early, unique. They felt good to play around with and offered up a different variety with how to engage with each of these. Now, before we wrap everything up, there is, again, a couple of adjustments made since the beta here going into launch, where for weapons in general, there was in the beta a weapon dispersion bug, or rather 2 actually. These will be fixed out for launch, where the first one was the sliding bug, where if you canceled a slide at any point before you actually finish that full animation, the larger aim cone that would be present because you are sliding at that point was actually transferring to your ADS, even when you were not sliding. So this was something that was persisting until you completed another slide entirely. That's been fixed. There's also another one that was if you jumped over small ledges and initiated a fall, you'd have a wobble that was only supposed to activate from a much higher fall height, but that's now been fixed as well. Recoil and firing characteristics are more accurate, reflecting specific weapons, and range profiles are now a lot more defined. This was absolutely something that I noticed here when playing with some of these weapons in our capture session a week or two ago at this point, where the longer range weapons felt like more accustomed to longer range. You didn't feel like you had these like SMGs built for close and medium range, challenging things at that uncharacteristically long range. So those were more defined and I think more unique to each of their weapons, which was definitely nice. As for specific weapons, again, that M87A1 shotgun had a few more adjustments to it. The sniper scope glint got dialed back a little bit. Snipers themselves will also now have to press the spot button to mark players, making that instant visibility not something as problematic as what we saw within the beta. But anyways, that is some of the changes here and the not necessarily full list, but right now the full list of weapons that we have for the launch of Battlefield 6. Is it possible we see one or two more squeak their way into the launch build? Sure. Am I counting on it? I don't think I'd bet on it, but I wouldn't say no to it happening. But for now, that's where we're going to wrap it up. I want to fill you guys in on a bit more information for Battlefield 6 ahead of the launch here and going into the weekend. So let me know your thoughts down below. Is there any weapon you're excited to get your hands on? Anything that you particularly like the sound of? Let me know. If you guys enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Battlefield 6 and even more FPS content. I'd love to have in the community. For now, thanks so much for watching. Mine has been Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care and peace.